right, good morning. It's Bernard Nomberg with another weekly episode of Nomberg Law Live. We try to come to you every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central. Hope everybody is doing well this morning, and I want to welcome my guest in North Carolina, Amy Perko. Good morning, Amy. How are you?
Good morning. Doing great. Thanks.
Well, I know how busy you are from our talks, and I just want to thank you for spending some time with us this
Sure.
morning, and I hope that hope we don't go overtime because there's just so much good stuff to talk about here. And I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction of Amy. She's a decorated collegiate athlete at Wake Forest, having played basketball. She's in the Wake Forest Sports Hall of Fame and had a great career then. And then it seems like Amy, you've been in sports your whole life, not just from childhood, but all the way through your adulthood, if you will. And currently, tell me if I have this right, that you've been with the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics for more than 10 years now. And at one point, you were the executive director, but you're currently the CEO of the Knight Commission.
That's correct. Yes.
Well, good. I got that part right.
Yes.
And with the risk of not being correct, I'm going to let you tell us just a little bit about, for folks who don't know, what is the Knight Commission and what kind of, where does it fit into the sports world, particularly with collegiate athletics?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the opportunity again to talk about this work. The Knight Commission, interesting history. We are an independent group. We're funded by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. And the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics was founded in 1989. So it's been around for a long time. And it was founded by two giants in higher ed at the time. Bill Friday, who was really the kind of father of the University of North Carolina system. He was chancellor and president of the North Carolina system. And Ted Hesburgh, who was the longtime president of Notre Dame. And at that time, you'll recall in the 80s, there were a number of academic scandals. You know, at that time, schools did not have to disclose their graduation rates of athletes, but from the studies that were done, the graduation rates of football and basketball players were very low. And then you had, the SMU death penalty scandal hit around that same time, and a couple of other academic scandals. And at that time, basically Bill Friday and Ted Hesburgh, along with other university presidents, came together and said, we need a blue ribbon commission outside of the NCAA structure to really push for reforms, to emphasize the academic mission, the educational mission, and do some things so that the athletes are prioritizing, and we are as universities, meeting our academic mission in athletics. And so the Knight Commission, the Knight Foundation funded that work. The commission put out a landmark report in 1991 that really created a roadmap for reform that the NCAA and universities embraced at that time. It led to a number of academic reforms over the next decade after that 91 report. And, fast forward now to where we are today, graduation rates of athletes are at their highest mark ever. We've seen a number of academic reforms over the years that have led us to the point where we are now, where there is a very much more accountability and obviously transparency with regard to graduation rates. So we're in a much better situation than we were when the Knight Commission was founded. But that's a little bit about the history and what its early emphasis was. Our mission has evolved, and we've gone through different periods of time where the commission has been active, or the commission has issued a report and not been active and kind of let things, settle. But we've been active for a number of years. As you noted, I've served as the executive director since 2005, and then was named the CEO and here more recently. And our work has really been focused primarily on, you can boil it down to emphasizing the college and college sports. But our purpose really is to prioritize the education, health, safety, and success of college athletes. And I can talk about, a number of our other reforms. I do want to mention just two that I think help people to understand the different kinds of policy changes that have occurred and can occur to put more emphasis on the educational mission. And there were two that were really kind of landmark policy changes led by the Knight Commission. One is, and we're getting ready to be in March Madness, so this is one of the best examples, is that for teams to compete in March Madness or in any sport, the postseason championship, those teams have to be on track to graduate at least half their players. And so there is a metric that was created to be able to, measure kind of real time what those teams were on track to do from a graduation standpoint, looking at retention and eligibility. And again, that system was one that came about beginning in 2004. And really because of the Knight Commission's push to create that kind of system. And we kept pushing for this strict threshold that you have to be on track to graduate 50% to be eligible for postseason. And the NCAA formally adopted that strict academic threshold in 2011. And actually the following year, one of the teams that had previously won the NCAA men's basketball tournament was banned from the tournament the next year because they didn't meet that threshold. And so in today's tournament, you don't see that many teams, no longer being withheld because, again, that threshold had its impact that now, coaches, institutions know, when we give an athlete a scholarship, we're committing to them to help them academically meet their academic goals as well. And you don't, it also, creates a disincentive, if you will, from running players off, giving up on players. And so that's been a real positive, real positive change. And, you can look back 20 years ago, there were some teams in the Final Four that had 0% graduation rates. So you don't see that anymore. And so that's an example. Another example is March Madness. I know we're going to talk a little bit about the money in the game, but March Madness generates basically $1 billion a year. It funds everything the NCAA does, from sponsoring Division III football championship to what we all know, the Division I men's basketball tournament. But that money really generates everything. The more than $20 million the NCAA is spending on concussion research, again, all funded by NCAA March Madness. Through that March Madness, though, the NCAA does send back to the Division I schools. There are over 350 Division I schools, and they receive a revenue distribution from the NCAA. It's about $550 million, and it's based on a lot of different factors. A big part of the factor is how teams do in the tournament. So conferences are rewarded when their conference teams do well. So I know you're in SEC country, so if more SEC teams make the NCAA tournament, the NCAA gets a bigger check the SEC gets a bigger check from the NCAA. One of the reforms that we pushed forward, again, that was adopted by the NCAA just 3 years ago, was to create for the first time some academic incentives in that NCAA distribution. So now when teams, the NCAA measures all the teams, not just basketball, but if they're meeting that a certain academic threshold of graduation rates, then they are rewarded through some academic incentive funding for achieving higher graduation rates of their athletes. So again, it was just, based on the concept that this is about just not just sports, but this is education through sports. So if we're going to reward how you do in the men's basketball tournament, we should also be rewarding programs based on achieving that academic mission as well. So those are, I think, two good examples about policy changes that our group has been a driving force behind.
And it's been over 30 years now that the commission has been in its place and doing its good work. How does, if there's no real affiliation between the Knight Commission and any of these institutions of higher learning or the NCAA or any other governing bodies, how is it that the commission is assigned or tasked, to look into certain subjects, to create? There's been these 3 reports that are so well known that have been put out. Where does it come from that, here's our next endeavor, here's where we're headed next with our work we're going to do?
Yeah. So, the Knight Commission, the easiest way to explain it really is it is a think tank, if you will, for college sports. And our approach is similar to what, other think tanks do in other public policy areas. And so our members, as I said, our founding co-chairs were 2 giants in higher education, Bill Friday and Ted Hesburgh. And they really set the standard for leadership for the commission. Our current co-chairs are Arnie Duncan, the former Secretary of Education, who was a great basketball player in his day at Harvard, and Carol Cartwright, who was President Emeritus of Ball State University and Bowling Green University. Our members are current and former university presidents, thought leaders, former players, people like Paul Tagliabue, former NFL commissioner, David Robinson, obviously a basketball legend with the San Antonio Spurs, and a long list of other leaders. But that gives you an example. But basically the commission has, as I said, its purpose of really leading transformational change to prioritize education, health, safety, and success. And so the commission members decide, here's how we're going to go about that. Here's our priorities. Here's what we think, the types of policy changes that need to be pushed, or this is the kind of research we need to do to help generate some ideas. And so that's the way we've gone about our work. Our current priorities, obviously the name, image, and likeness debate, how the NCAA will change its rules to allow athletes, the same or consistent opportunities that every student has on campus to use their name, image, and likeness for compensation. That's a big issue, and so that's one that we've studied for a long time. In fact, we held probably the first public discussion about these issues back in 2008 when NCAA football video game, had advanced to the point where the players in the game really did look like the actual players on the field, and we raised the questions of, what's the right course for college sports when you have these products that are emerging that are very different than the athletes playing on the field. Now we're using their likeness in commercial products, and is that fair to do without, allowing the athletes to use their own likeness in those kinds of commercial ways, obviously outside of the institution? So that's one of the priorities. The other priority right now is really to examine Division I college sports as a whole, as well as the impact of FBS football and the college football playoff. Division I college sports, everyone knows the commerce side has really exploded since the 70s, and really the 80s, since the Supreme Court decision that allowed conferences to begin, coming up with their own or really managing their own conference media rights, which led to things like the ACC network, the Big Ten network, all those kind of commercial networks that the big conferences have. But the point is, the 70s is when the NCAA's current structure really was kind of recreated into Divisions 1, 2, and 3. And, as I said, since then, the commerce side has exploded, but the structure itself and the governing mechanisms of college sports have really stayed the same. And so we think it's time to rethink the structure, that the commercial side has really outgrown what was envisioned. And, there are lots of tensions around the money in college sports. And so we're looking at right now doing a lot of different things to really examine whether there's a better way for college sports to exist and be managed on our campuses and universities that would better serve the universities as well as the athletes who are participating.
It seems like with so much money at stake, and maybe it's slowed down in the last couple of years, but say 5 years, 6 years ago, so many schools were swapping conferences or joining new conferences. When I played, the SEC in the late 80s was just 10 schools. And then in the early 90s, they added 2 more. And then several years back now, they added yet 2 more. And it seemed like they were headed toward these super conferences. And I know they're called the Power Five in some circles, but and I don't know if that's still the trend, but it certainly seems like it's the money that is the driving force over this. And maybe that's what you're referring to on the commercial side of it. But I don't know if there's still a trend that's what conferences are wanting to do, or that's what schools who are not part of those big conferences are hoping for. So maybe that's part of what you're studying as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you raise a good point. That certainly is part of the commercial side that I referenced that really has exploded. I think the conference movement, obviously settled out, and it was driven by, again, football TV footprint. There were a couple of cases where maybe basketball had some factor, but the biggest driver was television footprint for football media rights. And that's an important factor because, again, college sports is about more than football. And so the conferences now have structures that may work really well for football and playing 1 game a week. They don't work so well for volleyball, playing 2 games a week, for basketball, playing 2 games a week, for, you go on down the line, baseball, playing 3 games a weekend. You go down the line and you look at the other part. It may work well too for, the Power Five that have media rights that generate, I think combined, the 5 power conferences generate media rights from their conference TV packages as well as the college football playoff. It's over $2 billion a year. Wow. That's just, an incredible amount. It's in 2005, just 15 years ago, that combined number was around 500 million. So you can see how it's just grown exponentially. But that is one of the issues that we're studying, and we've done some studies in the past on whether schools would be open to looking at alliances for certain sports instead of just being totally driven by the conference their football team is affiliated with, because you don't see it as much as the Power Five, but for the FBS schools outside of the Power Five, like your Alabama, Birmingham, I'm just trying to think of some schools, in your area, that's one. One of the things they've lost in some of their conference shuffling is some of the regional rivalries and some of the. I was just getting ready to say that. Yeah, the conferences that are spread out. So even for them, it may have been the play may have been for TV dollars, but I think and we've got the data that show it. They've decreased, ticket sales have decreased because they've lost some of the regional rivalries. So I think in talking with some of those athletic directors as well, they're looking for potentially a different opportunity in the future that might work better. And that was one thing, bringing up the money I wanted to make your listeners aware of is we have an incredible resource on our database. I can show it to you if that might be helpful to you. It's on our website, knightcommission.org, and
And I put a link in the comments to the website so people can go there as well.
yeah, if you want me to share the screen real quick, I can.
Yeah, that would be great
Okay.
if you've got that.
Yeah, I'll go to the Knight Commission website. Can you see that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the Knight Commission website, and we have a lot of resources on our website, things that our commission reports you mentioned, finances of college sports, just data that helps really explain where the money comes from and where the money goes in college sports. And we also have a really extensive database that really describes again where the money comes from and where the money goes, and it breaks it out into colorful charts where you can see how much money goes to coaches' compensation, how much money goes to athletic student aid, facilities, recruiting, on down the line. And then you can find out too, where the money comes from, how much is from media contracts. But you can pretty much, enter into any school into this public Division I, and it generates all this information. You can look at it by conference as well. This is just a graph I showed of the football bowl subdivision as a whole in terms of where the money comes from and where the money goes. So you can see total revenues for all the public schools in the FBS in this particular year. 2018, the most recent year, is about 8.7 billion in total revenues. So it's for those who really want to know more about all the data and all the money, this is your resource that will explain all of that.
What a remarkable tool that is. That's such great information. Thank you for sharing that. Amy, you brought up about taking away some of the regional rivalries that have been historically there. I'm looking just a quick example of Conference USA, the football schools that are part of it. And you have South Florida all the way to North Texas and everything in between. And I couldn't imagine these schools are over in Charlotte. I mean, it's up to into West Virginia. It just seems so spread out, but it's the run to try to belong to a conference that's recognizable with great institutions. I guess it's the money just must pull or have such a stronghold for these universities to want to belong to them. I don't know how else to explain it. I mean, why would a school in South Florida want to play a team up in North Texas every year? Maybe they do, maybe they don't, I don't know. But it just seems like it would generate much more interest to try to play the schools that are closer to home. And maybe that's part of your studies. I'm not sure where it fits in, though.
Yeah. Well, again, it's there are 130 schools playing in the football bowl subdivision. So part of it is trying to figure out which schools are in that competitive division, that can play against each other and have some common affiliations. But that's really the question. Again, it might certain affiliations might work for football, but it's not necessarily the best for all sports. So I think there's some openness to looking at that issue. I just scrolled up just another resource that's on our database about where the money comes from. And one thing I wanted to point out here that, is another big factor of what we're looking at with Division I that the public really doesn't understand, because we all see, the 100,000 people at the Alabama game or the 100,000 at the Tennessee game, and you think, here all this money's coming in. But really that reality only exists for schools that we would call in the FBS that are in the first and second quartile of the FBS, those with the most money. And I'm showing a graph that shows the percentage, of where the money comes from. And this is an important graph we show to explain to people that, this breaks out the public schools of Division I and shows where the money's coming from. And when you look at this visually, you see lots of red and lots of orange for, most of the schools. And that's because the money's coming from student fees and the institution to support its athletics program. So again, from the Knight Commission standpoint, we believe in the role of college sports on our campuses, and we think, it should be an endeavor that is supported by the institution, and if the school chooses and the students choose, is supported by student fees. So we're not criticizing, that reality, but what has happened is that student fees and institutional support have been escalating at rates that are problematic for those schools, and it's happening because those schools are trying to keep up, with the 65 or so schools that have all their money coming in from the media contracts and other sources. So, it's important to understand for those, schools in the Sun Belt, and as an example, the Sun Belt Conference USA, they just operate with a different business model about where the money comes from. And that may, require in the future some different business model about how to manage the expense side of the equation.
All interesting information. Thank you for sharing that. And for those of you just joining us, I'm talking with Amy Perko, who is the CEO of the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. And we're getting deep into some of the work that the Knight Commission does, and they really, for over 30 years now, have had the student athletes' interests at heart, trying to protect their experience and how things are done on the various levels of college athletics. I want to welcome my dad, Joel, in Gulf Shores, Cece's in Eufaula, Mitch Jackson out in California, and Stephanie in Florida. So thank you guys for stopping by for a few minutes. Amy, let's pivot for just a minute. We're getting close to the end of our conversation, and gosh, there's so much here. We could talk for hours, but I don't want to take up more of your time. There was a press release that the Knight Commission put out in December talking about the name, image, and likeness issue. Talk to us a little bit about that. Seems, as we alluded to earlier, that's this when the California law came out a few months ago, the Fair Pay to Play Act, and many other states, including Alabama, are now introducing bills and trying to get laws to do just that. Talk about that press release and what the Knight Commission sees thus far and where they're headed with this topic.
Sure. Yeah, just real briefly on the name, image, likeness, it is a major issue. The NCAA is wrestling with it in terms of what's the right model to move forward, because the biggest concern is obviously we don't want to make any change to the rules that creates a pay-for-play kind of arrangement. And so what we're talking about with name, image, likeness is the ability for a college athlete to use his or her name, image, and likeness to earn compensation from sources outside the institution. So as an example, the rule right now would prohibit me as a college athlete from going out and signing autographs outside of the university, let's say at a local car dealership, signing autographs and receiving compensation for signing those autographs. And that's the kind of, potential opportunity an athlete may have in the future. A second example, social media is a big, driver among all of us now, and young people in particular, but you can go on pretty much any campus and there are students who who earn compensation as social media influencers. So we have, some athletes who have, 500,000 up to 1 million followers just based on, their own personal celebrity. So it's looking at those potential opportunities and allowing athletes to earn the compensation. But again, I think one important principle is going to be, number one, national uniformity. You mentioned the different state laws. The Knight Commission does agree with the NCAA that we believe we need to have national uniformity. So we need, either in the NCAA model to be the one that all the states accept as the ultimate, regulations to follow here, or there will be a need for federal legislation so that we don't have a patchwork of 50 different state laws that would be governing these rules. The second thing is, really to ensure that institutions are not involved in arranging for these deals, because then it would just become kind of a pay-for-play arrangement in terms of putting together endorsement deals for athletes. What some critics about this don't understand is, even pro sports, all the pro sports leagues have regulated endorsement models. They have salary caps, and to prevent manipulation of salary caps, they have regulations about endorsements, and teams cannot set those up for their star players because that would be a way to manipulate the salary cap. So I just use that as an example when people say, well, why does it need to be regulated? So, you can look at every, sports organization that allows, athletes to have their own endorsement deals, but there's still regulations around it, as an example. So those are a couple of key principles, and I think, over the next, really it's on a fast track, so I think over the next couple of months here, we'll be putting more out about, our principles and the way we think, this model should be guided. And the NCAA is due to release kind of its model in late April. So there'll be plenty more, in the media about this as we all kind of, look to, it will be a new model moving forward, but it's important that it still stay, protect the collegiate model as a whole.
Well, 2023 will be here before you know it. And it seems like, at least with the California law and some of these other states that are proposing laws, they all seem to be targeting that time period that may say, NCAA, you need to get your act together by this time period so we can all move forward. I don't know how cohesively it will be, but hopefully there'll be a model that is better than what's currently not in place.
Well, I think the NCAA model was moving toward being implemented in 2021, and there's some state laws that have a faster time frame. But I think, at this point, I think the way it'll play out is that the states will give the NCAA space, and the NCAA is moving as quickly as it can to try to have a new model in place by 2021.
Well, Amy, as we get close to the end of our conversation, let's shift gears. You played, as I said at the beginning of our talk, you played college sports. You have a daughter who currently plays college sports at Meredith College. She plays basketball. Mm-hmm. At what point during her life, and this is not meant to embarrass her or you, but at what point during her sports career did you go from being mom and coach to now just mom, and not being able to give that advice on or off the court? Because every parent goes through it who has a child who plays sports.
Yeah, every parent does go through it, and I'll say I probably didn't make the transition as quickly as she would have wanted me to. But as a parent, I've committed the parent sports sins like everyone else. But I would say that now that said, we've certainly enjoyed as well, taking her out to the backyard and playing and shooting, and she'll ask, in the transition, I've learned, and this is advice for any parent, is let your son or daughter, ask when they want your feedback on something rather than giving it. And so she'll ask now, hey, what did you think about the game, and what did you think I can work on? Or but she's been really fortunate. We've been fortunate to have some individuals who were really outstanding people who helped her with her game. But one of the things, just for your audience, that I really believe in this organization, Positive Coaching Alliance, and positivecoach.org. I would recommend it to any parent. They kind of have some guidelines about how to be a positive parent for your son or daughter in youth sports in particular, as well as coaches in terms of some guidelines for being a positive coach, because we all, I've benefited obviously from playing sports. I love sports, and we all want it to be, whether you're the parent, whether you're the coach, or whether you're the player playing it, you want it to be a positive experience. That doesn't mean you're always going to win, but you want it to be a positive growth experience, and that organization does a great job as in terms of helping parents and coaches orient themselves to how to provide that best experience.
And thank you for telling us about that. I put the link to that in the notes as well. Well, Amy, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you sharing what the Knight Commission has done and is got on its plate in the future. I know you're going to be very busy doing some very good things that will help a lot of people. So thank you for talking with me today.
Oh, you're very welcome. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
I'm just waiting to find out when they do the retro 1980s SEC backup quarterback name, image, and likeness on some video where I fit into that. Who knows? Anyway, well, guys, thank you again for joining me and interesting conversations with people in their areas of expertise. And Amy Perko with the Knight Commission certainly fits that bill. So this will conclude us for today, and we'll be back again next Tuesday at 10 a.m. for another episode of NOMBERG Law Live. Take care.